The vinyl of the booth was cracked and sticky against her bare legs. Maya shifted, the red fabric of her sleeveless dress bunching uncomfortably at her waist. This was a mistake. A colossal, $20 bet with her roommate-sized mistake. The man across from her said his name was Dante, but he looked more like an inmate than an investment banker, which is what the dating app had claimed. His black collared shirt was worn thin at the elbows, stretched tight across a chest that was pure, hard muscle. Faded tattoos snaked from beneath his cuffs and up his neck, intricate patterns of ink that spoke of time and pain. He had the stillness of a predator, his hands resting on the chipped formica table with a weight that seemed to anchor him to the spot. He had not smiled once. He just watched her with eyes the color of burnt coffee, his expression unreadable. This was not a date. It was an interrogation she was failing. She had been talking for 10 minutes straight, filling the oppressive silence with chatter about her job as a junior archivist, about a funny thing she saw on the bus, about the terrible coffee they were both pretending to enjoy. He just listened, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. She felt seen in a way that was both unnerving and, to her shame, a little thrilling. She thought this was just another bad date, a story to laugh about later. But when two men in expensive suits walked into the Greasy Spoon diner, the world tilted on its axis. The cheerful clatter of plates and conversation died. A sudden, heavy silence fell over the room. The men did not look at anyone else. They looked only at their table. And the man across from her, the quiet man in the cheap shirt, changed. It was not a big movement. It was a subtle shift in his posture, a hardening of his jaw, a lethal focus that sharpened his features into something carved from stone. Now she could not leave. The two men approached their booth, their shadows falling over the table like a shroud. They were big, with the easy confidence of men who had never been told no. The one on the left had a gold watch that probably cost more than her car. The one on the another side had a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a look of permanent surprise. "Moretti," the man with the watch said. His voice was gravelly, accustomed to giving orders. "Fancy seeing you in a place like this. Slumming it." Dante did not look up at them. His eyes remained fixed on Maya, but she could see something cold and calculating flicker in their depths. He took a slow sip of his coffee, the picture of calm.
It was a performance, she realized.
Every movement was deliberate, designed to project an image of unconcern that the tension in the air completely betrayed. "Finucci," Dante said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the cheap table. "You are a long way from home. Business brings me where I need to be," Finucci said, his gaze sliding over to Maya. He looked her up and down, a slow, appraising glance that made her skin crawl. The red dress suddenly felt too tight, too bright, a beacon in the dim diner. "And what business is this? Did not take you for the type to pick up strays." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but one look at Dante's face silenced her. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Stay quiet." The message was as clear as if he had spoken it aloud. "She is with me," Dante said. The words were simple, flat, but they held the authority of a judge's gavel. Finucci laughed, a short, ugly sound. "With you? She does not look like your usual type, Moretti." A little soft. The insult was meant to cut, to provoke. Maya felt her cheeks burn, a familiar wave of shame and defiance washing over her. She was used to comments about her size, but hearing it from this man, in this context, felt different. It felt dangerous. Dante finally lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting Finucci's. The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 20 degrees. "What I do," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "and who I am with, is not your concern. You have made your point by showing up here. Now leave, before you make a mistake." The air crackled with unspoken violence. Maya could feel it, a physical pressure against her skin. Finucci's smile faltered, the confidence in his eyes replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He had expected a different reaction. He had expected weakness, and instead, he had found a wall of absolute certainty. He glanced at his associate, then back at Dante. "This is not over," Finucci muttered, but the threat was hollow. He had lost the moment. He and his partner turned and walked out of the diner, the bell above the door chiming their departure. The moment they were gone, the diner seemed to exhale. The low hum of conversation resumed, but it was strained, hesitant. Everyone had seen. Everyone had heard. And everyone was pretending they had not. Dante turned his attention back to Maya. The coldness in his eyes had not receded. If anything, it had intensified. "We need to go," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Go where?" Maya asked, her own voice barely a whisper. "What was that? Who are you?" He ignored her questions. He stood up, dropping a few crumpled bills on the table, more than enough to cover their coffees. He reached for her arm, his grip firm but not painful. His touch was warm, a startling contrast to the icy demeanor he projected. The calluses on his fingers were rough against her skin. "You saw them. They saw you with me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "That makes you a liability. Or a target. Either way, you are coming with me until I can figure out which." Her mind raced. This was insane. This was something out of a movie. She was an archivist. She spent her days cataloging historical documents and breathing in the scent of old paper. She did not get involved with men who had enemies in expensive suits. "I am not going anywhere with you," she said, trying to pull her arm away. His grip tightened, not cruelly, but with an immovable strength that told her struggling was pointless. "You do not have a choice," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no malice in them, only a grim, absolute certainty. "Your old life, the one you had when you walked in here 10 minutes ago, is over. Coming with me is the only way you get to have a new 1 inch." That was the moment she understood. He was not just a man who looked like a convict. He was something far more dangerous. And her terrible blind date had just become the beginning of a life she never asked for. The world she thought she was in, a world of bad coffee and awkward small talk, had vanished.
She was in his world now.
A world of quiet threats and men with scars. And she could not leave. He led her out of the diner and into a waiting black car that materialized from the curb as if summoned by his mere presence. The car was the opposite of his clothes. It was sleek, expensive, and utterly anonymous, the tinted windows reflecting the grimy street like dark mirrors. A driver with a face like a stone wall held the door open for them. The interior smelled of rich leather and something else, something clean and sharp like cedar. It was a stark contrast to the stale grease of the diner. Maya slid onto the seat, the smooth leather cool against her skin. Dante got in beside her, and the door closed with a heavy, final thunk that sounded like a jail cell locking. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the diner. It looked so normal, so mundane, a little island of light in the gathering dusk. It was a world she no longer belonged to. She had crossed a line the moment those men had walked in, and she had a terrifying feeling she could never go back. The car moved through the city with silent efficiency. Maya stared out the window, watching the familiar streets blur into an alien landscape. She did not recognize where they were going. They were heading toward the industrial district by the docks, a part of the city known for its warehouses and forgotten buildings. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dante was staring straight ahead, his profile silhouetted against the passing city lights. "Someplace safe. Someplace Finucci will not think to look." "And who is Finucci?" He turned his head slowly, his gaze pinning her to the seat. "He is a problem. And now, because he saw you, you are part of that problem." "I did not ask for this," she said, a note of anger creeping into her voice. "I was on a blind date. A bad one, I might add." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. It was not humor, not exactly. It was a kind of weary acknowledgement. The profile was fake. It was designed to be unappealing. "I needed to meet someone outside of my usual circles. Someone normal. The meeting was supposed to be quiet. Unnoticeable." "Well, you failed," she shot back. Spectacularly. He did not respond. He simply turned back to the window, the conversation over. The silence that filled the car was thick with unspoken questions. Maya's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, but beneath it all, a strange and unwelcome curiosity was taking root. She was an archivist. Her job was to uncover stories from fragments of the past. And the man sitting next to her was the most compelling and most dangerous document she had ever encountered. The car eventually pulled into a dark, cavernous warehouse. The driver got out and opened a large, rolling metal door, revealing a surprisingly clean and well-lit garage inside. Parked within were several other high-end vehicles, all as dark and anonymous as the one they were in. Dante led her from the garage through a heavy steel door and up a flight of concrete stairs. At the top was another door, this one made of solid wood. He unlocked it and pushed it open, revealing a spacious, minimalist apartment. It was a shocking contrast to the industrial exterior. The furniture was modern and sparse, the colors muted grays and blacks. A massive wall of windows looked out over the dark, churning water of the harbor. The only personal touches were a small, overflowing bookshelf in one corner and a single, framed black and white photograph on a side table. "You will stay here," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "Do not try to leave. The doors are reinforced, and the windows are bulletproof. My man will be stationed outside. You will be safe." "Safe?" she repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "I felt safer on my disastrous date with a fake, poor investment banker." He walked over to a wet bar and poured 2 glasses of water, his movements economical and precise. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt of unexpected electricity shot up her arm. She pulled her hand back, as if burned. "You are never safe, Maya," he said, and the sound of her own name on his lips was a shock. It was the first time he had used it. He said it differently than anyone else had. It was not a question or a greeting. It was a statement of fact. A claim. You just did not know it. Now you do. He gestured to a closed door. "That is the bedroom. There are clothes in the closet. They should fit.
Get some rest."
He turned to leave the main room, heading toward another door she hadn't noticed. "Wait," she called out. He stopped, his back to her. "You still have not told me who you are." He was silent for a long moment. Then, without turning around, he spoke. "My name is Dante Moretti, and I am the man who now owns every second of your life until this is over." The door closed behind him, leaving her alone in the vast, empty room with nothing but the sound of the water and the frantic beating of her own heart. She spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation. The apartment was a gilded cage, luxurious and completely sterile. The clothes in the closet, as he had promised, fit her perfectly, a collection of simple, comfortable pieces in dark colors. It was unsettling, as if he had known her measurements before they ever met. Food appeared outside her door, left by the silent guard she never saw. Dante was a ghost. She heard him moving around in other parts of the apartment late at night, the low murmur of his voice on the phone, but she rarely saw him. When she did, he was a fleeting presence, all coiled tension and dark energy. He would look at her a long, unreadable stare, and then disappear again without a word. Her fear began to curdle into a strange sort of boredom, a restlessness that gnawed at her. She was an archivist. She solved puzzles. And this was the biggest puzzle of her life. She started to observe. She studied the apartment, looking for clues about the man who held her captive. The bookshelf was her first discovery. It was filled with books on military history, classical philosophy, and poetry. An odd combination. The spines were cracked, the pages worn. These were not for decoration. They were read and read often. Tucked inside a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, she found a faded photograph. It was of Dante and another man who looked like an older version of him. They were younger, standing on a fishing boat, smiling. It was the first time Maya had seen even a hint of a smile on Dante's face. The man had his arms slung around Dante's shoulders, a gesture of easy affection. Her second discovery was the photograph on the side table. It was the same man from the fishing boat, alone this time, his face etched with a quiet sadness that mirrored Dante's own. One evening, Driven by a desperate need for answers, she waited for him. She sat on the large leather sofa, the book of philosophy in her lap, the photograph tucked inside. He entered the room just after midnight, looking exhausted. He had a fresh cut on his cheekbone, and his knuckles were bruised. He stopped when he saw her, his body instantly tensing. "What are you doing up?" he asked. "I could not sleep," she said, her voice quiet. "Who was he?" She held up the book, letting the photograph slide out onto the cushion between them. His face hardened into a mask of stone. He walked over and picked up the photograph, his movements stiff. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. "He was my brother," he said, his voice rough. "His name was Marco." "What happened to him?" she asked, her heart aching at the raw pain she saw in his eyes, a pain he was trying so desperately to hide. "He is dead," Dante said, the words clipped and final. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his armor. She saw the vulnerability he kept buried so deep. "He died because I was not there, because I made a mistake I will not make again." That was his wound, the ghost that haunted him, the failure he was still paying for. In that moment, he was not just her captor. He was a man drowning in a grief so profound it had reshaped his entire world. "Finucci," he continued, his voice low and venomous. "His family was responsible. It was a territory dispute. Marco tried to broker peace. They saw it as weakness." He looked from the photograph to her. "Now you understand. Finucci's seeing you with me. He sees you as a weakness he can exploit. Just like he did with my brother's trust." A cold dread washed over her. This was not just business. This was a vendetta, and she was standing in the middle of it. She could have been afraid. A part of her was terrified. But another part of her, the archivist, the part that saw the story behind the facts, felt a surge of something else. Empathy. A dangerous, unwelcome empathy for the monster who held her prisoner. "I am sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "Do not be sorry for me," he said. "Be sorry for them." The next day, everything changed. A package arrived, left outside the door. It was a simple white box with her name written on it in neat block letters. Dante intercepted it before she could, taking it into the other room. A few minutes later, he emerged, his face grim. In his hand, he held a single, perfect red rose, identical to the ones that grew in the small garden outside her old apartment building. "They know where you lived," he said, his voice a low growl. "They have been watching you." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. The threat was no longer abstract. It was personal. It was a rose from her garden. It was a message. "We can get to you. We can get to anything you care about."
But there was nothing for them to get to.
Her parents were gone. She had no siblings, and her roommate was on a 2-month trip abroad. There was only her. Dante saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly.
"I will handle this," he said.
"But we have to move. They are getting closer."
He told her to pack a small bag.
As she was throwing the few items of clothing she had into a duffel, she realized something. She could run. While he was distracted, making calls, she could make a break for it. The guard outside was his, but maybe she could get past him. She could disappear, change her name, start over. It was a slim chance, but it was a chance. She walked to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hand was on the doorknob. All she had to do was turn it. But she hesitated. She thought of the photograph of his brother. She thought of the raw pain in his eyes. If she ran, Finucci's people might find her. And they would use her to hurt him, to make him pay for the sin of having a weakness, however temporary. She took her hand off the knob. It was not a conscious decision, not really.
It was an instinct.
A terrible, life-altering instinct. She was not going to run. She was going to stay. When Dante came to get her, bag in hand, he looked at her, then at the door, and then back at her. He knew. He knew she had considered it. And he knew she had chosen not to. He did not say anything. He did not have to. A silent understanding passed between them. Her choice had forged a new, unspoken bond. She was no longer just a prisoner.
She was an ally.
A reluctant one, but an ally nonetheless. They left the warehouse through a series of underground tunnels she never knew existed. The escape was frantic and chaotic. They emerged in an alleyway miles away, where another car was waiting. As they sped through the city, Dante's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his face growing darker with every second. "They hit the warehouse," he said, hanging up. "Minutes after we left. Someone on the inside is talking to Finucci." Betrayal. The one thing his world could not tolerate. Now, the danger was not just outside. It was inside his own family, and they were running out of places to hide. The new safe house was a cramped, run-down apartment in a part of town that had been forgotten by time. It was a world away from the luxurious warehouse. It was small, dusty, and anonymous. It was perfect. Forced into such close proximity, the space between them shrank. They moved around each other in the small kitchen, their bodies brushing past one another. The accidental touches sent sparks through the tense air.
She learned the little things about him.
He drank his coffee black. He could not sleep for more than a few hours at a time. He had a faint scar above his heart that he never talked about. One night, the inevitable happened. Finucci's men found them. It was not a frontal assault. It was a quiet, creeping siege. The power was cut. The phones went dead. They were trapped. They could hear them moving in the hallway, testing the door. Dante pushed her into the small bedroom. He pressed a small, heavy pistol into her hand. Her fingers recoiled from the cold metal. "I have never," she started to say, her voice trembling. "Point and pull the trigger," he said, his voice harsh, but his eyes holding hers. "Do not hesitate. If they get through that door, you do not hesitate." He turned to leave, but she grabbed his arm. "Where are you going?" "To buy us time." He was going to face them alone. He was going to die to protect her, the same way he had failed to protect his brother. "No," she said, a sudden, fierce clarity cutting through her fear. She was not going to be his penance. Thinking fast, she scanned the room. The apartment overlooked a narrow, dark alley. Below, a fire escape zigzagged down the brick wall. It was their only way out, but the men were at the door. They needed a distraction. Her eyes landed on a single window. Across the alley, another apartment building stood dark and quiet, except for one lit window where an old man was watching television. An idea, desperate and ugly, bloomed in her mind. She grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a thick glass lamp from the bedside table. "Cover your ears," she told Dante. Before he could react, she hurled the lamp with all her strength through their own window. The glass shattered with an explosive crash. At the same time, she screamed, a raw, terrified sound that echoed in the night. Lights flickered on in the neighboring building. People shouted. The distraction was set. The men in the hall would be momentarily confused, unsure of what was happening. It was the only chance they would get. The fire escape. "Now!" she yelled at Dante. He stared at her for a second, a look of stunned surprise on his face. Then he grabbed her hand, and they scrambled out the broken window and onto the rickety fire escape. Below them, chaos was erupting as neighbors came out to see what the commotion was. They used the confusion to slip down into the alley and melt into the darkness. They ran for what felt like hours, not stopping until the city was a distant glow behind them. They found shelter in an abandoned subway station, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Maya sank to the ground, her body shaking with adrenaline and delayed shock. She had done that. She had endangered innocent people, created chaos, all to save them. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. She was part of his world now, in a way she had never been before. Dante knelt in front of her. He gently took her hands, his thumb brushing over her trembling fingers. He had a long, shallow cut on his arm from the broken glass. Without thinking, she tore a strip of fabric from the hem of her shirt and began to wrap the wound, her movements deft and sure. He watched her, his expression intense. "You saved us," he said, his voice quiet. "I put people in danger," she whispered, shame washing over her. "You did what you had to do to survive," he corrected her. "In my world, There is no higher law. He reached up, his fingers gently touching her cheek. His touch was no longer accidental. It was deliberate. You should have run. Back at the first safe house, when you had the chance, you should have run. She looked up, meeting his dark, searching gaze. You did not give me one, she said softly. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. She would not have taken it anyway. That was their confession. Not of love, but of something deeper, more dangerous. A shared fate, an acknowledgement that they were tied together, for better or for worse. He leaned in, his face just inches from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the scent of cedar and gunpowder that clung to him. She thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to, but he stopped, pulling back at the last second. The denial was more potent than any kiss could have been. The man who betrayed me, Dante said, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. The one who told Finucci where we were. It was my cousin Paolo, the man I trusted to watch our backs. The betrayal was personal, a knife in the heart of his family. Finucci has him now, Dante continued. He is using him as bait. He wants a meeting. He wants me to come for Paolo. It is a trap, she said immediately. I know, he replied, his jaw tight. But Paolo is family. I do not leave my family behind. She saw his wound, his guilt over his brother, driving him. He was walking into the same mistake, letting loyalty blind him to the obvious trap. But this time she was here. Then we do it my way, she said, a new strength hardening her voice. She was no longer a witness. She was a player in this deadly game. He had taught her the rules. Now she would use them. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a historic Italian social club in the North End, a place of old rules and older loyalties. Finucci believed he had all the leverage. He had Paolo. He had Dante walking into a trap. What he did not have was Maya. He did not even know her name. He just saw her as the soft girl from the diner. It was a mistake that would cost him everything. Maya wore a simple black dress, blending into the shadows. Dante had wanted her far away, but she had refused. You see the board like a soldier, she had told him. I see it like an archivist. I see the patterns you are too close to see. Reluctantly, he had agreed. She was his eyes and ears, watching from a small office overlooking the main hall where the meeting would take place. She had a small earpiece, her only connection to him. Finucci was there with a dozen of his men. Paolo was there too, looking pale and terrified. Dante walked in alone, a deliberate show of confidence that Maya knew was a mask for the storm raging inside him. Moretti. Finucci greeted him with a triumphant smirk. Glad you could make it. I have something that belongs to you. He shoved Paolo forward. Dante's face was unreadable. Let him go, Finucci. This is between you and me. It is, Finucci agreed. And this is how it ends. You on your knees, begging for your cousin's life. Just like your brother begged for his. The taunt was meant to break him. Maya held her breath. Through the earpiece, she whispered one word. Wait. She had spent the last day doing what she did best. Researching. She had dug into every piece of information Dante had on the Finucci family, looking for a weakness, a fracture. And she had found one. A quiet transfer of a significant Finucci shipping interest to a shell corporation. A corporation whose sole director was Finucci's own underboss, the man standing right behind him. Now, she whispered into the mic. Dante's eyes flickered toward Finucci's second-in-command. You should be careful who you trust, Finucci, Dante said, his voice calm and clear. Some men see a king's weakness as their opportunity to take the throne, especially when they have just secured the funds to do it. A flicker of confusion crossed Finucci's face. He looked at his underboss, who suddenly could not meet his eyes. The seed of doubt was planted. He is lying, the underboss blustered. Am I? Dante asked softly. Or, did you think no one would notice the transfer of the Red Hook shipping contract last Tuesday? A profitable asset to give away, unless you were not giving it away at all. The room went silent. Finucci stared at his most trusted man, the pieces clicking into place. The betrayal Dante had suffered was now mirrored on his enemy's face. In that moment of chaos, that split second of distrust, Dante moved. It was not a brawl. It was surgery. Precise, lethal, and devastatingly fast. He disarmed the man closest to him, using him as a shield as he moved toward Paolo. The room erupted. Maya could only listen, her heart pounding as she heard the sounds of the fight through the earpiece. She did her part. She triggered the fire alarm system she had hacked into earlier, adding to the chaos. Sprinklers rained down, and strobe lights flashed, turning the scene into a disorienting nightmare for Finucci's men. When the dust settled, Dante was standing, Paolo behind him, safe. Finucci was on the floor, his reign over. Dante had not just won the fight. He had dismantled his enemy's entire organization from the inside out, using the information she had given him. They did not speak on the ride back to Dante's real home, a stunning penthouse overlooking the entire city. It was a place of cold glass and steel, a fortress in the sky. The man who lived here was not the man from the diner. He was a king on his throne. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering expanse of lights below. Maya came to stand beside him, her reflection a faint ghost next to his solid form. The danger was gone for now. The debt was paid. She was free to go. He would let her. She knew he would. "You have a choice," he said, as if reading her mind. He did not look at her, his eyes fixed on the city he ruled. "I can give you a new life. Any name, any city you want. You would be safe. You would be free of this." She looked at their reflections. The archivist and the Mafia boss. The quiet woman in the simple dress, and the man carved from violence and grief. They were from two different worlds, two different languages. But they had found a way to understand each other. She thought of her old life, the quiet solitude of the archives, the safety of her ordered world. It was gone. It had vanished in that greasy spoon diner. She could try to get it back, but it would always be a ghost, a memory of a person she no longer was. "And the other choice?" she asked, her voice steady. He finally turned to face her. His dark eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw not a king, but a man. A man who had found something in the chaos he never expected. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. His grip was not a restraint. It was an anchor. "The other choice," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper, "is that you stay." He did not say he loved her. He did not make promises of a gentle life. He offered her nothing but what he was, a world of shadows and violence, of loyalty and blood. He was offering her the truth. Maya looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. She had spent her life cataloging the pasts of others. Now, she had to choose her own future. She squeezed his hand. The silence between them was not an absence of sound. It was an agreement.